Shalom and welcome to Shalom Yeshua's Ministries live stream for Saturday, April 4th, 2020. I'm Pastor Carl Carrick and I'm here with my wife, Pastor Donna Carrick. And tonight we'll be bringing you Leading to Passover, Nisan 10 to 14. And immediately following tonight's teaching, we'll be taking and answering your questions via live stream here on YouTube about celebrating Passover. So please, if you'd like to hear and see more of our live stream videos, or visit our YouTube channel at Shalom Yeshua Ministries. Also, because YouTube is now using an AI to monitor its algorithms, it's important more than ever to like and subscribe and leave us a comment. This way it lets YouTube know that you value our program. So, Donna, we're over to you.
Thank you for joining us today. This is Lamb Selection Day. It's Nisan 14 on the Hebrew calendar. So this is a very significant date, and we'll talk about that tonight in the slides. Let's go ahead and pray first. Father, we come into your presence, asking for your help, asking for your guidance, asking for your wisdom, asking for you to lead us and guide us into all truth. And Father, as we hear your truth, we ask that you would create a harvest in our lives. In Yeshua's name, amen. Alrighty, leading to Passover, Nisan 10 to 14. The story really begins prior to Passover. We're looking at the resurrection of Lazarus. I'm sure you all know the story. John 11, 38 to 40. So, Yeshua comes to the tomb of Lazarus. It was a cave, and a stone was lying against it. Yeshua says, "Roll away the stone." Martha, the dead man's sister, said to him, "Master, by this time he stinks. He's been dead for 4 days." Yeshua says to her, "Didn't I tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God?" Now, every word in the scripture is important, and we don't want to overlook something here. It says he's been dead 4 days. In Jewish teaching, they would say that when a person had passed away, they hovered around their body for 3 days, and then they would leave. If you read this story in John 11, you find out that people were urging Yeshua to come to Lazarus before he died, but he kept stalling, and he stalled, and he stalled, and finally he shows up, and then the sisters of Lazarus are quite angry with him because he didn't show up before Lazarus died, but he intentionally showed up after the 4 days. Why? Because in the Jewish thinking, they understood that Lazarus' spirit must have gone away now. He truly is dead. So Yeshua waits for that moment when he can say, "I am the resurrection and the life. I'm the one who has the power over this situation." And so he says, "Didn't I tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God?" So we go on, verse 41 to 44, and it says, "So they rolled away the stone. Yeshua lifted up his eyes and said, 'Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but because of this crowd standing around, I said it, so that they may believe that you sent me.' And when he had said this, he cried out with a loud voice, 'Lazarus, come out!' He who had been dead came out, wrapped in burial clothes, binding his hands and feet, with a cloth over his face. And Yeshua tells them, 'Cut him loose and let him go.'" Verse 45 to 48, it goes on. "Therefore, many of the Judeans who had come to Miriam and had seen what Yeshua had done put their trust in him. But some of them went to the Pharisees and told them what Yeshua had done. So the ruling Kohanim, that's the high priests, and the Pharisees called a meeting of the Sanhedrin. This is the legal body. And it says, "What are we doing?" And they ask, "This man is performing many signs. If we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him. And the Romans will come and take away both our holy place and our nation." The underscore there is their underlying fear. They are afraid that they are going to have the Romans come and take away their holy place and take away their nation. Were they really worried about the followers of Yeshua? Maybe, but they seemed much more worried about what they would lose. So then they decide to plot against Yeshua. We see that in John 11:49 to 54. But one of them, Caiaphas, who was Kohen Gadol, that's the high priest that year, said to them, "You know nothing. You don't take into account that it is better for you that one man die for the people, rather than for the whole nation to be destroyed." Now, he did not say this by himself, but as the Kohen Gadol that year, he prophesied that Yeshua would die for the nation. And not for the nation only, but also so that he might gather together into one the scattered children of God. So from that day on, they plotted to kill him. Therefore, Yeshua no longer walked openly among the Judeans, but went from there to the country near the wilderness, to a city called Ephraim. He stayed there with his disciples. Well, you know what? He continues to draw huge crowds. People knew about Lazarus. It says here in my notes, it was a few days after the resurrection of Lazarus. Yeshua then is drawing a crowd, and he's teaching on the Mount of Olives, which happens to be directly across from the Jerusalem temple. So as he's sitting there, he can see the temple across the Kidron Valley. Yeshua then foretells the destruction of the temple. Isn't it interesting? He is sitting right there where he can point to the temple, and he can use it as a visual object lesson. And he foretells the destruction of the temple. He foretells the signs of the end of the age, the abomination of desolation that would end up being in the temple, the coming of the Son of Man on the clouds to gather his elect, the lesson of the fig tree, the parable of the wise and foolish virgins, the parable of the talents, and the final judgment. He's sort of wrapping up all of the teaching to get them ready for when he is gone. He's telling them all the things that are going to be coming. And you know, it's interesting. He is supposed to be coming back to the Mount of Olives. So he was sitting in the very place where he would be coming back. We see that in Zechariah 14. And the story goes on in John 11:55 to 57. Now, the Jewish Passover was near, and many people went up out of the regions to Jerusalem before Passover to purify themselves. So they were searching for Yeshua, saying to one another as they stood in the temple, "What do you think? Won't he come to the feast at all?" Now the ruling Kohanim and the Pharisees had given orders that if anyone knew where he was, he should report it so they might arrest him. So we can see that the plot is underway. They have made their decision that they are going to kill him. He hasn't had a trial. Nobody has come forward to complain about him to the Sanhedrin. Nobody has said, "We need this man to be gone." It's the ruling party of the Sanhedrin who decided he's guilty, and that was without trial. Now, John 12 tells us that we are 6 days before Passover. That would be the 8th of Nisan, because Passover is Nisan 14. So it says in verse 1 to 3, 6 days before Passover, Yeshua came to Bethany, where Lazarus was, whom Yeshua had raised from the dead. This isn't that long after the resurrection. So this is what happens. He comes back to visit. It says, so they prepared a dinner there for Yeshua. Martha was serving, and Lazarus was one of those reclining at the table with him. Then Miriam took a pound of very expensive oil, of pure nard, and anointed Yeshua's feet, and she wiped his feet dry with her hair. Now the house was filled with the fragrance of the oil. Remember, this is dinner at their house in Bethany. But guess who is a guest for dinner? Judah. Remember, from Iscariot. John 12, 4-8. It says, but Judah from Caiaphas, one of his disciples, the one who was about to betray him, said, why wasn't this oil sold for 300 denarii and the money given to the poor? Okay, I have to wonder, why was he at this dinner? Remember, he's already decided that he's going to betray him. So he must be trailing him. He must be looking for his opportunity. He must be looking for a way to trip him up. And so he shows up at the dinner that Yeshua has gone to. And then he sees the anointing of his feet with this expensive perfume, and he thinks, I've got my chance. I'm gonna complain about this. So he then says, why wasn't the oil sold for 300 denarii and the money given to the poor? Well, why would he care about that? It says, now, he said this not because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief. Since he had the money box being, he was like the treasurer that kept the money for the disciples as they traveled. It was their traveling expenses. Since he had the money box, he used to steal from what was put in it. So you see, he didn't care about the 300 denarii being used for the poor. He wanted it put in the money box so he could take it. Therefore, Yeshua said, leave her alone. She set it aside for the day of my burial. You will always have the poor among you, but you will not always have me. We go on, John 12, and this is 9-11. Now, a large crowd of Judeans knew he was there and came, not only for Yeshua, but also to see Lazarus, whom he had raised from the dead. I'm sure he was the talk of the town. They probably were wondering, what does it look like for somebody who was dead to be resurrected? It goes on. So the ruling Kohanim made plans to kill Lazarus also. Did you know that? They were going to kill Lazarus because on account of him, many of the Jewish people were going and putting their trust in Yeshua. Now, why would they want to kill him? Because then they could say, oh, that's just a story. He really wasn't resurrected. He's actually dead. So that was the plan. Let's kill him too. Well, let's go through our timeline. We started with the 8th of Nisan, when Yeshua had arrived in Bethany that day. And that evening, which now is sunset, would begin the 9th of Nisan, and he had dinner there. Then it says in the text that it was the next day that he goes to Jerusalem. So that would be the 10th of Nisan. And we'll see that in John 12, 12-13. The next day, the huge crowd that had come up for the feast, what feast? Passover. They heard that Yeshua was coming to Jerusalem. So they took palm branches and went out to meet him, shouting, Hoshiana, Baruch haba b'Shem Adonai, which means, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord, the King of Israel. Now, they're waving palm branches. They're quoting from a psalm. It's 118, verse 25 to 26. So I want to show you that psalm. We look at Hoshiana. Please, Adonai, save us. We beseech you, Adonai, prosper us. Baruch haba b'shem Adonai. Blessed is he who comes in the name of Adonai. And then it goes on. We bless you from the house of Adonai. Adonai is God, and he has given us light. Join the festival with branches up to the horns of the altar. Now, why is this significant? This particular psalm was part of a grouping of psalms called the Hallel Songs. And they were always sung as people were celebrating the festivals. This particular one, the festival of Passover, they were quoting Psalm 118 as they were waving the branches for Yeshua. And those branches would be waved also as lambs were being issued into the temple for the sacrifices for Passover. So what were the verses just before the quote that we see in John? Here they are, Psalm 118, 21 to 22. I give you thanks because you have answered me and have become my salvation. You know what? In Hebrew, that would be Yeshua. Have become my Yeshua. The stone the builders rejected has become the capstone. Remember that? The stone the builders rejected, the chief cornerstone. And they have just finished saying that when they get into blessed is the name of Adonai, etc. And they go on with the palm branches, etc. So they have just finished telling him, you have become my salvation. You have become my Yeshua. And they've identified him as the stone the builders rejected. Let's look at John 12, 13 to 14. And this is right after that incident of the palm branches. Finding a young donkey, Yeshua sat on it, as it is written, fear not, daughter of Zion. Look, your king is coming, sitting on a donkey's coat. So he is fulfilling a prophecy. He's finding the young donkey for a reason. Let's look at the prophecy. It's Zechariah 9:9. It says, rejoice greatly, daughter of Zion. Shout, daughter of Jerusalem. Behold, your king is coming to you, a righteous one, bringing Yeshua. Wow, bringing salvation. He is lowly, riding on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey. So Yeshua has fulfilled the prophecy by riding on the donkey. But he's also fulfilled the prophecy on a specific day. He is the Lamb of God coming into town to be inspected. Where does that come from? The Passover story. It's Exodus 12. We see that in verse 1 to 6. Now, Adonai spoke to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, saying, tell all the congregation of Israel that on the 10th day of this month, each man is to take a lamb for his family, one lamb for the household. Your lamb is to be without blemish, a year-old male. You must watch over it until the 14th day of the same month. Then the whole assembly of the congregation of Israel is to slaughter it at twilight. So let's look at the underscored parts here. The 10th day of the month. Wasn't that Nisan 10, the day that Yeshua comes into town on the donkey? He comes in on the very day that the lambs for Passover were to be inspected by the families. They were to make sure that they were without blemish. They were to watch over these lambs until the 14th day and then they would slaughter the lambs. Let's see how that's fulfilled by Yeshua. It goes on in Exodus 12, the rest of the story, 18 to 20. It says, during the first month, in the evening of the 14th day of the month, that's the slaughter day, you are to eat matzot, that's unleavened bread, until the evening of the 21st day of the month. For 7 days, no hametz is to be found in your houses. For whoever eats hametz, that soul will be cut off from the congregation of Israel, whether he is an outsider or one who is born in the land. You are to eat no hametz. In all your houses, you are to eat matzot. So what's hametz? Leaven. Leavening agents is things like yeast that makes bread rise, or baking soda that puffs up cookies and cakes. That's leaven. It puts air into the bread and it makes it rise. Well, what do we know about leaven according to the New Testament? 1 Corinthians 6, 6-7 says this. Don't you know that a little hametz leavens the whole batch of dough? Get rid of the old hametz, so you may be a new batch, just as you are unleavened. For Messiah, our Passover lamb, has been sacrificed. So what do we see here? He says the lamb has been sacrificed, and in the Passover order of things, the lamb would be roasted, and then they would eat the meal that night, starting with the unleavened bread. It had to be part of the meal, the unleavened bread. So we are told in Corinthians, get rid of the hametz. It's going to leaven the whole batch of dough. And if you read in the rest of 1 Corinthians 6, it's talking about sin, getting rid of the sin in our lives. Well, let's see how Yeshua fulfills that. Remember, we're supposed to remove the leaven from our houses to get ready for Passover. And in the story of Yeshua, Passover is almost here. He came into town on the 10th of Nisan, and then the lambs are to be slaughtered on the 14th of Nisan, and that night at Nisan 15, they eat their Passover lamb and eat the matzot. So we have Matthew 21, verse 10 to 13. It says, when he entered Jerusalem, the whole city was stirred up, saying, who is this? And the crowds kept saying, this is the prophet Yeshua from Nazareth in the Galilee. Then Yeshua entered the temple and drove out all those selling and buying in the temple. He overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those selling doves. And he said to them, it is written, my house shall be called a house of prayer, but you are making it a den of thieves. Now, think about the timing of this. This is the time when the Jews would be clearing out the leaven from their houses. They would be inspecting the lambs. They would be preparing for Passover. So he has entered Jerusalem on Nisan 10. It says right away, he goes to the temple. He overturns the tables of the money changers. Why? Because they were charging outrageous prices for the money of the Romans to be changed into shekels so that people could buy the temple sacrifices. The doves, the pigeons, whatever they were going to sacrifice for Passover or for their daily sacrifice in the temple, the money changers used this as an opportunity to charge extreme fees to them. And it was not okay, and it was sin in the temple. And so Yeshua goes right on schedule during the time of cleaning the leaven, and he goes and cleans out the sin in the temple of God. All right, what about the 11th of Nisan? That's the day after he had come into town on the donkey. This is Matthew 21:17 to 19. Then he left them and went out of the city to Bethany. Where was that? Remember, that's where Mary and Martha and Lazarus lived. He spent the night there. Now, early in the morning, as he was returning to the city, he became hungry. Well, what's our timing? He had left them, that was on Nisan 10, and went out to the city. He spent the night there, so now early the next day, now we're on Nisan 11, and he was returning to the city. He became hungry. Seeing a lone fig tree by the road, he came up to it, and he found nothing on it, except leaves only. And he said to it, "May no fruit ever come from you again." And the fig tree shriveled up at once. Well, what is that all about? You know, in Jeremiah, there's a story about a basket of figs. And it says in the story that the figs represent Israel. So is he talking about Israel there? Is he saying, you're not bearing fruit, so no fruit will come from you again? Is he cleaning out the leaven in Israel from those who do not bear fruit? Is he talking to everyone in general? If you don't bear fruit, then you're done. I'm cleaning out the leaven. But here's another possibility about the fig tree. If you remember in the story of the Garden of Eden, when man sinned, he covered himself with a fig leaf. He covered himself with the leaves of a fig tree. And so in some respect, that was a violation, because God said, no, I will give you a covering. And he took the fig leaves off, and he covered man with the skins of an animal. So the fig tree, in some respect, represents man trying to hide from God. And he says, in essence, I don't want that ever again. So he's also addressing the sin of man, cleaning out the leaven. Let's go to Matthew 21:23 to 27. This is still Nisan 11. Remember, we've got to have the lamb inspected during that time, Nisan 10 to Nisan 14. It says, now when he entered the temple, the ruling Kohanim and the elders of the people came to him while he was teaching, saying, by what authority are you doing these things? Who gave you this authority? What are they doing? They're inspecting the lamb. Yeshua replied to them, I also will ask you one question. If you tell me, I likewise will tell you by what authority I do these things. John's immersion, his baptism, where was it from? From heaven or from men? They began to dialogue among themselves, saying, if we say from heaven, he will say to us, then why didn't you believe him? But if we say from men, we fear the crowd, for all hold up John as a prophet. Well, they wigged out. So they answered Yeshua, we don't know. And he said to them, neither am I telling you by what authority I do these things. So what do we see in this passage? At the very beginning, it was the ruling Kohanim and the elders in the temple. They were grilling him. They wanted to know, what authority do you have? They were inspecting the lamb. Matthew 22:15 to 22 is another example of the lamb being inspected. This is the Pharisees this time. Then the Pharisees went and plotted how they might trap him with a word. They sent to him some of their disciples, along with the Herodians, saying, "Teacher, what do you think? Is it permitted to pay taxes to Caesar or not?" But Yeshua, knowing their wickedness, said, "Why are you testing me, you hypocrites? Show me the tax money." So they brought him a denarius. And he said to them, "Whose image is this? And whose inscription?" "Caesar's," they said to him. And he said to them, "Give therefore to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's." And what was their response to that? And hearing this, they were amazed. So they left him and went away. What do we see in this passage? The Pharisees tried to trap him with a word. They were inspecting the lamb for blemishes. However, it backfired on them. They couldn't find anything wrong with what he said. They were, in fact, amazed. Here's our next example, Matthew 22, 23 to 32. On that day, it's still Nisan 11. On that day, Sadducees, who say there is no resurrection, came to Yeshua and questioned him, saying, "Teacher, Moses said, if someone dies having no children, his brother as next of kin shall marry his widow and father children for his brother." Now, there were 7 brothers among us. The first married and died, and having no offspring, left his wife to his brother. In the same way also the second and the third, down to the 7th. Last of all, the woman died. So, in the resurrection, whose wife of the 7 will she be? For they all had married her. But answering, Yeshua said to them, in the resurrection, they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are like angels in heaven. But concerning the resurrection of the dead, haven't you read, I am the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. He is not the God of the dead, but of the living. When the crowds heard this, they were astounded at his teaching. So who was inspecting him this time? The Sadducees. They didn't even believe in the resurrection, right? That's what the passage said. They didn't believe in the resurrection. Here they are asking him questions about the resurrection, and then they're utterly astounded by his answer. Well, they're inspecting the lamb, and they can't find any blemishes. Matthew 24:34. This time it's the Pharisees coming back. The Pharisees, when they heard that Yeshua had silenced the Sadducees, they pretty much got shut up. They didn't know what to say. It says, when he had silenced the Sadducees, they gathered together in one place, and testing him, one of them, a lawyer, asked, "Teacher, what is the greatest commandment in the Torah?" This is a lawyer. This is someone who is an expert in the law of Moses. He is an expert. He's a Torah scholar. He's testing. He's trying to find if there are any blemishes. Matthew 22:41 to 42. Now, while the Pharisees were gathered together, Yeshua asked them a question, saying, "What do you think about the Messiah? Whose son is he?" There's another one, right? First it's the Pharisees, then it's the lawyer, the Torah scholar, then it's the Pharisees again. But look what happens as a result of their interchange. Verse 46. No one was able to answer him a word, nor did anyone dare from that day on to question him any longer. So what do we find? Well, the lamb is being inspected right on schedule. From Nisan 10 to Nisan 14, he will continue to be inspected for blemishes. We see in the story that Pilate also inspects the lamb. This is Luke 23:1 to 6. Then the entire assembly got up and brought Yeshua to Pilate. They began to accuse him, saying, "We found this fellow subverting our nation, forbidding payment of taxes to Caesar." Hey, wait a minute, that's not true, is it? "And saying that he himself is Messiah, a king." Okay, so they come to him with a lie, an outright lie, and they want Pilate to find him guilty of something that he actually didn't do. So let's see what Pilate says. So Pilate questioned him, inspecting the lamb. He says, "Are you the king of the Jews?" "As you say," Yeshua replied. Then Pilate said to the ruling Kohanim and the crowds, "I find no case against this man." Well, they insisted, saying, "He stirs up the people, teaching throughout all Judea, starting from the Galilee to as far as here." Well, Galilee was the key word that Pilate noticed. When he learned that Yeshua was from Herod's jurisdiction, he sent him to Herod, who was also in Jerusalem at that time. The key word was Galilee. Pilate did not see anything wrong. He could not find a case against Yeshua. He saw no reason to do anything to him. So he decided the best thing was to send him to somebody else. He was going to pawn him off on somebody else because he did not want to deal with the situation. So Herod now has to deal with it. So Herod inspects the lamb. Luke 23:13-15. Now Pilate called together the ruling Kohanim, the leaders and the people, and he said to them, "You brought this man to me as one who incites the people to revolt. But having examined him in your presence, I have found no case against this man regarding what you accuse him of doing, nor did Herod, for he sent him back to us. Indeed, he has done nothing that is worthy of death." Why? He's the lamb, the perfect lamb, the unblemished lamb who will be slaughtered on Nisan 14. Right on schedule. Exodus 12:6. "You must watch over it, the lamb, until the 14th day of the same month. Then the whole assembly of the congregation of Israel is to slaughter it at twilight." What were the other things they were supposed to do? The leavening. These are what we would be doing. We are now on Nisan 10 today. Leavening agents are yeast and baking soda, and these are what you would remove from your house prior to Nisan 14. This year, that would be April 7, 2020. To prepare for the Passover, these are some things that you'll want to have on hand, and get those pretty soon. You'll need matzah crackers, or you can do home-baked matzah bread. Make sure there's no leavening agent in it. Bitter herbs that you would have on hand. Horseradish is customary. Mustard greens are definitely very bitter. And then parsley is very customary. It's often used at the Passover Seders. Then we have grape juice or red wine. It's customary to drink 4 cups of wine at the Passover meal. Roasted lamb. This is mentioned in the scriptures, and it's to be roasted in the afternoon and eaten after sundown. The other requirement for Passover is to have a holy convocation. That means that it's God's kids who are getting together. It's not an event that you celebrate by yourself. It's something that you bring other believers together to do together. But the other requirement about it is for the circumcised only. And in Deuteronomy 10 we see that that is believers only. So what I'd like to do at this point is to open this up for any questions. If anyone has something they'd like to send a message through the online chat, and I'll try to answer those as to how we would prepare for the Passover. How do we get ready our houses? How do we celebrate on the day that we celebrate? So if there's any questions in the chat, I'll go ahead and answer them. Carl, do you have anything there?
Nothing yet. The live chat is open, so if anyone wants to go ahead and ask a question, feel free to type it in, and we will. I'll tell Donna what it is and announce it here on the air, and we will answer that question.
So remember, Passover is a really, really, really important day on the Hebrew calendar. Passover is the story of the Exodus in chapter 12. And one of the things that we do when we celebrate together, we have our roasted lamb at the meal, we have our matzah crackers, we have our bitter herbs, and we tell the story. We go over the story of Passover. As it says in Exodus 12, we are supposed to remember the story. And we are to tell it to our children and explain it from generation to generation to generation. So why is the Passover celebration so important? Because it is a rehearsal. We are rehearsing every year, going back to telling the story, reminding ourselves that we are saved by the blood of the Lamb. At Passover, what happened is the final plague that was being inflicted upon the Egyptians was the death of the firstborn in the family. Every single household had someone die on that night, except the Israelites, because they had been told to roast the lamb, use the blood of the lamb to paint it on the wooden door frames of their houses. And that blood would be a sign so that when the angel of death passed over the houses and killed the ones in the Egyptian houses, they would completely pass over the ones who had the blood of the lamb. And that is a picture, a prophetic picture of Yeshua and the blood of the lamb on the wooden cross. And it is our understanding that as we are covered by the blood of Yeshua, that we are delivered from the bondage of sin. And it's only after the Israelites were delivered and left Egypt that they walked through the waters. And then God parted the sea for them, and they walked through the waters and got to the other side. The enemy was still chasing them. Pharaoh had decided that they could go, and he kicked them all out. But then, as they were heading out of town, he changed his mind. He decided he was going to come after them again. So, as they passed through the waters of the Red Sea, and God had opened up the Red Sea for them, the enemy was chasing them. And as they continued on through the Red Sea on dry ground, the enemy was chasing after them. But God was closing up the water on top of the enemy so that they were drowning and the Israelites were protected. So it's a picture of us walking through the water of baptism. We have been delivered by the blood of the Lamb, Yeshua. That's our salvation. We come through the waters of baptism right after that. And then we get to the other side and we remove the leaven from our houses when we celebrate the festival. And what is leaven? It's a type of sin. So what we are seeing in the picture is first salvation, then baptism in the waters, then remove the sin from our lives. It's in that order. We don't remove sin first in order to be covered by the blood of the Lamb. It's backwards. We don't have to come to be, we don't have to come clean to be saved. We have to be saved and then come clean. That's the order. It's a come as you are party. We come as we are, ask for the blood of the Lamb to protect us. And then, and only then do we need to be concerned about removing the sin from our lives. And that's the story of Passover. And that's what we celebrate year after year after year, to remind us of our great salvation. Carl, are there any questions?
No, there's no questions right now. We're going to go ahead and close it out for tonight. If you do have any questions, feel free to email me at carl@shalomyeshua.org. It's SHALOMYESHUA.org. First name is Carl, so Carl at. And please put celebrating Passover in the subject so I know what the question, and ask your question in the body of the letter so we can send an email back with a reply for you. But we're going to go ahead and say goodnight right now.
Thank you for coming.
And thank you for watching with us today.